misconduct was often overlooked and unpunished for a long time before the Boston Globe exposed a widespread problem of child molestation within the Catholic Church. That is, with the exception of Hans Schmidt. In the early 20th century, he made history as the first and only American priest to be executed. His deeds were gruesome, his list of crimes was extensive, and the press was eager to show that even revered religious leaders can be monsters by laying out his entire story. Even as a kid, Hans Schmidt stood out. He spent many unsettling afternoons as a young boy in the German town of Aschaffenburg, where he was born in 1881, watching the local slaughterhouse process cows and pigs. He also pretended to be a priest with a makeshift altar, enthralled by Roman Catholic rites. These two interests from your youth would eventually intersect in a way that would give you chills. In 1904, Schmidt, by then 25 years old, was ordained as a priest in Germany. He then served for another 4 years in Germany before being transferred due to conflicts with his superiors. To him, this was just the beginning of a long pattern of conflict and flight. He was moved to Louisville, Kentucky's St. John's Parish, in 1908. Schmidt had conflicts with Louisville's Catholic leaders, so he moved his congregation to St. Boniface Church in the East Village neighborhood of Manhattan. While he was the most recent arrival in St. Boniface, a young Austrian housekeeper by the name of Anna Muller had also recently been hired to keep shop. Then, an affair between Schmidt and Muller began. But Schmidt's pattern of moving around persisted, and he was eventually transferred to St. Joseph's Church in West Harlem. The church may have discovered the affair and wanted to prevent word from spreading, which could explain the transfer. They were separated by an ocean, but their love endured. Hans Schmidt married Anna Muller on February 26, 1913, in a private ceremony he conducted. It goes without saying that Catholic priests are forbidden from entering into marriage or having sexual relationships. In 1913, when Hans Schmidt was 31 and Anna Muller was 21, their secret was discovered and both of them were brutally killed. When Muller informed Schmidt that she was pregnant, Schmidt knew that if word got out that a celibate Catholic priest had married and impregnated a woman, his career as a priest would be over. Schmidt rented an apartment for Muller in uptown Manhattan on September 2nd and slashed her throat with a butcher's knife. He took a hacksaw to her body and cut it in half before he removed her head. He placed her lower body in a pillowcase that was monogrammed with a A, and a large piece of grey-green schist was fastened to each section of her body. Then, Hans Schmidt dumped Anna Muller's remains in the Hudson. The schist he had collected in Manhattan was what he planned to use to bring the body down to the ocean floor. The upper torso of a woman was discovered by 2 children 3 days later in New Jersey, across the Hudson River. The bottom half of Muller's body was discovered 3 miles downstream in Weehawken, New Jersey, still wrapped in the pillowcase with the schist tied to it. The evidence was turned over to the New York Police Department despite the fact that the body was discovered in New Jersey. Schmidt can find plenty of schist in Manhattan, but it's difficult to come by in New Jersey. Based on the results of the autopsy, the police believe the victim to have been a young woman under 30 years old, approximately 5 feet 4 inches tall, and weighing between 120 and 130 pounds. The woman had given birth prematurely and had been a few weeks into her pregnancy when she was murdered, according to the autopsy. To solve the case, the NYPD used their most promising lead. The victim is monogrammed pillowcase. The police were able to identify the company from the monogram because the company kept meticulous records. The A pillowcase paperwork pointed to Muller's dwelling. Mr. Hans Schmidt, the landlord, told the police, had rented the place 2 weeks earlier for a female relative. A bloody murder scene was still present in the apartment he led the police to. There was a brush and several bars of soap by the sink, but the blood stains on the walls and floor were still visible. Schmidt fared better by scrubbing the blood from the butcher's blade and handsaw before concealing them in a trunk. Another trunk contained letters written to a mullah that made reference to Schmidt's employment at St. Joseph's. There were matching embroidered handkerchiefs and a pillowcase in the trunk, too. In order to question Schmidt about the bloody apartment rented in his name, lead detective Inspector Foreau and his partner travelled to St. Joseph's. In a matter of minutes, he admitted marrying and killing a mullah because I loved her. Blood is the proper medium for the completion of sacrifices. On December 7, 1913, Hans Schmidt's trial formally began. Schmidt's attorneys tried to have him found not guilty by arguing that he was insane and consumed by bloodlust. Schmidt and his attorneys held on to the insanity plea for 23 whole days. New York's tabloid newspapers got exactly what they wanted out of this case. The media set up their circus tent around the courthouse to report on every juicy detail, and yellow journalism was in full swing. In the courtroom, Schmidt prevailed. The pleading worked. There were 2 people on the jury who believed his insanity defense, leading to a 102. The second time around, the jury was not as forgiving, and Judge Vernon Davis urged them not to reach the same verdict as before. If you are satisfied that the defendant purchased the knife and saw with which he cut up the body, thinking of using them as he did, and if you are satisfied that in the middle of the night he went to the flat, took off his coat and cut her throat, and then cut up her body, what conclusion do you come to? Davis addressed the panel with his question. Rely on your judgment, your familiarity with men. Keep in mind that insanity isn't always an excuse for wrongdoing. The jury found Schmidt guilty of first-degree murder and gave him a death sentence by electrocution. On February 18, 1916, just over a year before the United States entered World War I against Germany, Schmidt was electrocuted to death in New York City's infamous Sing Sing prison. Schmidt is still the only American priest to be put to death by the state. Schmidt's troubled past emerged from the shadows as the media relentlessly pursued new angles to cover. In fact, Schmidt seemed to leave behind him a wake of unsolved crimes, but the public's faith in church leaders shielded him from serious consequences. First, they discovered Schmidt had a second place to live. He had a printing press inside and was producing $10 bills, which were worth about $240 in today's money. Schmidt was also planning to team up with a dentist in Manhattan to commit a series of murders and then steal the life insurance money. St. John's Parish in Louisville, Schmidt's first U.S. employer, had a body of a young girl, aged 9, discovered in its basement. Schmidt had been in Louisville when the girl disappeared, and now a local janitor is being held responsible for the crime. Similar to how O'Mulier's body was discovered, it had been dismembered. Evidence linking Schmidt to the murder of a young woman in his native Aschaffenburg, Germany, dates back even further in time. After Schmidt was executed in the United States, the Germans were never able to question him, and the case was effectively closed. So far as we know, Hans Schmidt is the only Catholic priest in the United States to be executed. It's debatable whether this means that he represents a unique low point in church history or that Americans place too much faith in religious authorities.